there's been a whole lot of Roman statue avatar having phallus receptacles flapping in unison about the need for federal intervention on every issue from race relations to corrupt courts. And if you buy that BS, might I interest you in a Siberian sweat lodge? Government must be the only thing on earth that when it splits in half like John Goodman's Daisy Dukes, no one says, well, that sucked, let's not do that again. But rather, the operative infirmity is invariably identified as, welp, guess we didn't government hard enough, which is a hell of a sentence to unironically utter in a time when the feds can accurately recount the precise shape and color of the corn kernels in my crap. You can whine and say the word lolbert all you like, as if I wasn't invoking the name of Pat Buchanan 20 years before most of you aching-ass proctonauts in the Eurotrash right started pretending to advocate his political positions. Over the teeth, past the gums, brace for truth, bitch, 'cause here she comes. There is no government solution to a people problem. Seeing as civics courses have gone the way of Nick Cage's real hair, I can see you'll require an illustration. By way of functional example, allow me to supply the most anarchical archetype at hand, a period of human history alternately described as foundational and tempestuous, the Old West, a time when federal authority was non-existent, even local law enforcement was hands-off, if it indeed existed, and the regulatory state came in two flavors, 45 or buckshot. Yet for all the dime novels and later Hollywood's attempts to portray the period as homicidally profligate, the historical record paints a portrait of a land where pistol packing was comparatively rare, and the murder rate made modern Chicago look like Mad Max. What revisionist historians and hacky YouTube essayists rarely relay to their hapless audiences is that for the most part, these regions were settled in relative peace and almost immediately resulted in the more or less equitable establishment of water, lumber, mineral, and all other property rights, all without a single cult peacemaker clearing leather. Turns out, musket balls and bullets are more expensive than India ink and a quill, and thus the cost-benefit analysis on violence turned out to be an order of magnitude more immoderate than the cost-benefit analysis for mutual cooperation. And so 17 seconds after the first cows mooed across Montana, the first ad hoc, unsanctioned, unsocialized, federally unrecognized cattlemen's associations emerged, immediately securing both property and grazing rights for all while allocating land parcels to avoid a surf at a six-shooter smoke. Even on the rare occasion conflict arose, it was at worst settled via a range war. And even then, it was almost exclusively due to an outside entity such as wandering shepherds or lawless poachers encroaching on claimed land. Compared to the Brothers' War brewed up by the federal government in years prior, a conflict that claimed nearly 1 million American lives, these so-called range wars, such as the Pleasant Valley War with 25 to 50 casualties, or the Colfax County War with around 200 dead dickheads, were barely as deserving of the name war, not least of which because modern-day Chicago has deadlier weekends. But wholesale violence did eventually arrive to these frontier communities, and predictably as a Chris Nolan film where a guy wears a suit, it arrived with the encroachment of an armed federal government. When the Fedwits, located thousands of miles from the wild frontier, were suddenly able to forcibly expand the cost and taxation of public works projects among all residents, regardless of their stake in the eventual policy outcome, the incentive for peaceable cooperation effectively evaporated. Prior to federal works projects, or what the dictator Abraham Lincoln called the internal improvement system, settlers were required to respectively cooperate for, say, water rights, and in so doing, factor in the necessary needs of all who imbibed in said system when ladling out the H2O. Now that a distant dickhead government was handing out subsidies like Seattle hands out crack pipes, suddenly local water administrators no longer need trouble themselves with the pesky needs of uppity locals. Rather, they could crush the citizenry irrespective of individual needs, secure in the knowledge that federal force and a taxpayer-funded standing army would back their play at rifle point, and knowing the cost-benefit analysis would favor them whether they performed a public service or a public execution. All too often, they opted for the latter. But there's an additional element few ever consider. Many of these asshats were emigres, meaning not only were they engaging in open, if uneasy, negotiation over depreciable resources with armed asshole strangers, unprotected by police and unimpelled by federal force, they were doing so with a member of a race or nationality they may or may not have a 1,000-year blood feud with. Spaniards conferring for lumber rights with a black guy only recently released from a leg iron. Slovaks selling stream rights to Serbs, cats and dogs running in the streets, and all in exigency's name. I doubt they were batting eyes or hand-jiving each other under the table, but it turns out breaking bread costs less than breaking bones, and so they abided together. And in contrast to today, where the melting pot is now a crocked pot, they lived in a surprising level of peace, and all while the Old West period produced the most unmatched agglomeration of racist slurs and one-liners since the dawn of damn civilization.
General.
You're a short aren't you?
Where the f***ing come into this?
F***ing monkey! Scrawled in on the side.
Plain general.
Call me just plain.
Grab the
Short plains.
of the high desert.
the pure f***ing ness of it.
Who, you ignorant f***ing chink?
Whoa!
Yellow monkeys, chili chompers,
Limey.
dirt worshipping heathen.
You bastard. Squarehead.
Jungle f***ing
Because racial harmony's neat and all, but without our inherent capacity to call an Italian a toga-tucking limberdick dago, what are we even procreating for, folks? Pimple-faced fagaloons at federally funded universities can primp and pose about fighting oppression and liberating black culture all they like. The fact remains, over the course of the frontier era, more American blacks went from picking cotton to gainfully growing cotton, but only after the government was harder to find than their father. Even in extreme cases such as slavery, foundational social change was far and away the least fatal remedy. In England, a slow dawning aversion to the institution led the public to put pressure on the government to offer paid manumission of slaves. No civil war required. In America, if you believe the public education inculcation, we fought a war over slavery that Honest Abe didn't up and realize was about ending slavery till, 2 years into the damn thing, and it came at the cost of a conservatively estimated 600,000 dead, more American lives than all prior and subsequent U.S. wars combined, though revisions as recent as 2011 now place that figure near 800,000 souls, which begs the question, by the way. If the Union felt the need to sweeten their official fatality figures after the fact, what does that say about public sentiment so far as whether the Confederacy or Union instigated the conflict? Because if the majority agreed the Confederates firing on Sumter was the cause of the conflict, would you want to diminish the deadliness of the war that followed? Or would it make more sense to artificially amplify the deadliness of the Southerners' crimes and thus accrue greater political leverage in a tense time of Reconstruction? Enjoy that charcuterie board of food for thought. In England, the people pushed for change. The government obliged them, and the result was a largely non-lethal resolution. In America, one of the most murderous conflicts of the pre-modern age, and one that augured for the war crimes to come in the trenches of the Great War. And why? Simple. Skyscrapers spring up from the foundation, not the rafters, retard. If you want a genuine malady for the ills afflicting us as a society, the only true elixir is local, whether it be county-level government or social attitudes or the civic-level policies they ultimately influence. If you want an evil institution to be dead and buried, and you don't want millions of Americans to be planted beside that bitch before the end, it may be time to dislodge your domes from your dumpers, stop ignoring every political race that ain't the president, and actually begin to give a goddamn on the local level. I mean, can government theoretically provide a panacea for societal ills? Sure, I guess. I can't think of any examples offhand, but for the sake of argument, we'll pretend it can provide a solution. But even if that were the case, it'd be more rare than spotting Ben Shapiro at Big and Tall. And I'd remind you all that even heroin can be a solution if you dissolve it in water. I'm Razor Fist. Godspeed!
Wave a penny under the Jew's nose. They got living breath in them. Brings them right round.